It's not doing one. Oh, there. It says we're live now, so we're on the spot.
Hey, we're live. I'll practice my best live face.
There we go. Perfect.
Are we rolling then? We're rolling.
We are. We're rolling. We're broadcasting to the world.
Should we give people a few minutes to show up, or how do you want to do this?
Yeah, it's kind of different with us doing this both at the same time like this. I've got some numbers rolling in, so if folks on my end, if you're listening, if you can hear the audio really well from both Jane and I, can you send us a message and let us know?
That would be amazing. I'm going to jump on Facebook momentarily and just share the broadcast to my page as well.
Perfect.
So we can, oh look, I can see myself. That's always slightly disturbing. That will,
Oh, good. We're getting confirmation that the audio is working from both of us. So this is super cool. This might be my new way of doing podcasts. I'm loving it.
Perfect. Yay. Okay. So I have just posted away.
Perfect.
This is awesome. So you're in Pennsylvania right now?
I'm in Virginia right now.
Virginia right now.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Your clinic schedule is something of a miracle. Like when I've looked at it, I'm like, wow, here's like the speed of light hopping around the country.
It feels that way sometimes. I'm pretty sure I'm on a marathon some days.
It's fabulous. It's so fabulous. So thank you so much for agreeing to do this with me. It's really, really fun.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I know I told you before that, it's causing a little anxiety for me because now I'm on the other side of the microphone with this deal. As many podcasts as I've done, I've always shied away from being on a podcast myself, being in the hot seat. So,
yeah, well, I mean, I come across all friendly, but once I get into the interrogation, it is the intense. So, I'll just put that
I'm
out
expecting
there from the start. Yeah.
Perfect.
So we're doing this in one of two ways. We are going live on your page right now, and this is also going to go up on the Confident Writer podcast in a couple of weeks, which I'm super excited about.
Awesome.
I have a couple of questions that have come in from the outside as well, which we will share along the way. And actually, let me just grab that one now so we can perhaps get started with it.
Perfect.
But for those of you who, well, there's two sides to this, because obviously we're on your page right now, so everyone who is in your world will be very familiar with the work that you do and the, all the amazing knowledge that you have. And I know, for one, just from the start, to start off with a compliment, your range and breadth of experience and knowledge about horses and anatomy and biomechanics and behavior is so impressive. And I've been learning so much from you in the relatively short time I've been aware of you being out there. So thank you so much for that.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you.
So to get us started, I'm really curious to know more about you and how you came to be in the position that you are in now. And I know that we also have a question from Chelsea, and I'm just going to unplug my headphones here so we can all, who has a similar stream of thought going. So I'll just press play from her, and I think this is a really good one to get us started with. So let's hear from Chelsea right now.
Awesome.
Hi, this is Chelsea from Northwest Ohio. My question for Patrick is, could you describe how you've gotten to where you are now in your understanding of horses? And what have been some of the most important steps along your way? Thanks.
Oh, man. That's a short question with a long answer. Have we got all night?
It is. We have all night.
Oh, good. So, gosh, how have I gotten to where I am with my knowledge? I would say, when people ask that question, I'm a little hesitant on that because I feel like there's not a whole lot yet that I know. There's a lot that I want to learn. There's a lot that I've been continuing to learn. I was really fortunate growing up with horses as a kid. And I had some horses early on, that one in particular that really set me on a path of trying to, or needing to, find something different than what was kind of commonplace in the area that I was growing up and in the circles that I was kind of traveling in. Um, this horse was super aggressive, out of self-defense, as it turned out. But he was really a challenging horse, and he really pushed me and stretched me to learn. And I had been taking advice from local trainers and things like that growing up. Friends of the family. I grew up in the 4-H program, and I grew up showing horses and that sort of thing. But it seemed like all the advice that I was getting, the horse kept getting more aggressive and more dangerous, to the point where you couldn't walk through the pasture with this horse unless you had, growing up, I think I was 14 at this point, you had to have a piece of 6-foot PVC pipe as self-defense to go through the pasture to get to the barn, because he would attack. And at one point he cornered me in the back of his stall, and he trimmed the sides of my ears with his hind feet. And that was the day that I decided I had to try something different. I had to learn something more, after I, uncurled from my sobbing, bleeding ball in the corner of the stall. I was a mess, yeah. But that day I committed myself that I had to look outside that box that I was in at that point. And so I started ordering videotapes and ordering books from everybody that I could find. And, from folks that I got really fortunate that through time was able to eventually call them friends and mentors. Folks like John Lyons and Ray Hunt and guys like that. That really just set me down a path of trying to understand a little bit more how the horse's mind works. And then I was very fortunate, I was afforded an opportunity to apprentice and live with Ray Hunt for a few months. That really changed things for me. And then I got more and more involved in dressage, which led me to the biomechanics. And so kind of going from learning how the mind worked to then learning how the body worked even more. And it's just been a path, it's been a journey. And I'm kind of an addict when it comes to learning. So I get on these little rabbit trails and side roads and start studying down all sorts of things. I think I was 18 or 19, I took an equine chiropractic course because I wanted to learn more about that. I just recently got back from farrier school because that was something I've always wanted to do and learn more about, is the horse's feet. I feel like we can't ever know enough, or at least I can't. So that's been the biggest part of what's kind of gotten me where I am. And I've been very fortunate to make a lot of friends on the way. And, I would always say I'm not very good at this, but I've got some really good and really smart friends. And they share what they know with me very freely, and I'm fortunate for that.
Yeah, it's so true what you say about that worldview that you come to have, where it's like you start to peel back the layers, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, I really don't know anything, or a little bit, and you want to know more, and there's all of these pieces that fall into place.
Yes.
So when I was reading through your bio on your website as well, it's so impressive, honestly, Patrick. And I was thinking, how is he not like 85, having done all of this stuff and worked with all of these people? But it was really, really amazing. And so that those two pieces that fit together between this horsemanship element and having that background and behavioural and emotional understanding of the horse, and then this beautiful classical dressage piece where everything starts to blend in together, and you have the biomechanics and the other elements of understanding that come to form such a beautiful holistic picture of how to work with horses. So for those of us who might be attempting to fuse those two worlds together as well, such as myself, how would you describe the difference between groundwork from a horsemanship perspective and in-hand work from a classical perspective, and how we can actually bring those two together, but also how they're distinct pieces in their own right?
Yeah, and that's a question that I get quite frequently, and sometimes I would say that line gets a little bit blurry. right? Because there's a lot of things that we can, as far as the in-hand work goes, that we can really incorporate into everything that we do from the very beginning, the very basics of making first contact with a horse, even as young as a foal. Excuse me. But as a generalization, I often say that groundwork gets the mind ready to learn. In-hand work gets the body more ready to carry the rider. That's a way that I tend to think about it. And I kind of use other different analogies with that too. I think of our groundwork as being like our primary education, right? Sometimes I refer to it as kindergarten or grade school. And I don't say that to demean it or belittle it, because I think it's the most important part. If we had solid groundwork and we never got to the in-hand work, we'd probably be okay. If we try to do in-hand work without getting solid groundwork, we're going to run into some troubles, right? So I think of the groundwork as the, like I said, the primary school, and then the in-hand work more as the secondary school. Another way that I think of it is our groundwork is kind of like line dancing, right? If we're thinking of it from a dancer perspective, the groundwork is like line dancing. I move your feet, I move my feet, you move your feet. We can all be on the dance floor at the same time, and until one of us has had too much to drink, nobody's bumping into each other. Whereas our in-hand work is more like ballroom dancing. There's more of a contact there. There's more you and I can work together and shape each other. There's never pushing or pulling, but it's a togetherness. It's a synchronicity in that sense. So I kind of, I draw those lines, but the reality is those lines blur quite frequently as well.
Yeah. It's never completely compartmentalized, hey, like everything sort of fuses together.
Exactly.
So if you were working with your own horse and training from the start, the groundwork elements would be where you would start fundamentally before you started to look at more advanced is not the right word, but more systematic approaches to organising their body. Would that be the start point for you?
I think so. To a differing degree, depending on that horse's natural conformation or who that horse is as a person, because something as basic as halter breaking a young horse, I've gotten to the point where I want to focus on their balance right off the bat. And can we influence the way that they hold themselves and carry themselves, even at a standstill, once we start putting the halter on? That becomes something that I feel can help to build a lot more strength, balance, confidence as we go through the process. So I would say that's at least one piece there that I would filter in. I would trickle that in kind of as early as possible. Yeah.
And so regardless of where you start in the training, the relaxation piece seems to be like the fundamental foundation that we're looking to build from.
Absolutely.
And if we're talking generally, so making the assumption that people listening don't have much of a classical or a biomechanical background, so we're just sort of talking on a principled perspective. When it comes to actually talking about roundness and connection and engagement, all of these terms which are thrown around in the horse world with varying degrees of understanding.
Yeah.
We have this idea or maybe this way of going about things where it's like, okay, well, inside leg to outside rein or more forward or, keep him going, when actually what I have really come to understand through your work as well, if we were to take it from a much more subtle and refined perspective, is actually that relaxation in the horse is obviously an entire piece, that everything works in together, but it actually starts with the jaw and the tongue and the front end, and the connection between those elements and how that actually runs through the whole body, both in a muscular sense and in a neurological sense, to connect with the back end. Mm-hmm. I know this is a huge topic, but can we talk about that, like how relaxation begins in that place, or how it is that we can start to create relaxation from that place?
Oh boy, yeah, we can certainly talk about that. That's a great conversation. Sometime we should get to.
Yeah, we should get
No,
into
no,
that.
no. We're gonna get there. So the balance, the relaxation, the balance, all of that, starting with the jaw, starting with the tongue. That's very important to us. Any pressure that we put on the horse's mouth through the reins, if the horse doesn't have what my friend Mark Russell would call an academic understanding of the contact, if the horse doesn't have that, there's just going to be pressure that's going to cause the horse to lean into the bit, and that's going to cause the horse then to lean onto the forehand. So if the horse isn't understanding soft yielding and slight manipulations or flexions of the jaw through the bridle as a means of relaxation and then guiding or shaping, we're just going to end up on the forehand, which, if you and I are, if we're standing up and we lose our balance, we fall down, right? Horses will, of course, do that also if it becomes that dramatic, but in general, they will fall to the forehand, okay?
Yeah.
And if you or I are out of balance, there's a certain degree of mental, emotional, physical tension that's causing because of being out of balance, basically. It's the brain saying we need to stay safe, we need to stay upright, right? And so there's that tension that comes into the body. And the same thing happens with our horse. If they're on the forehand, if they're losing their balance, there's a certain degree of tension that's coming from that. So the first thing that we need to have in that horse is relaxation and an understanding of the aids in that way, and then we need to get that balance. The idea of more forward, a friend of mine, Ariana Sakaris, made a post on social media a few months back, and I forget exactly the wording that she used, but basically what she said was we can't send bad balance more forward.
Yeah.
Which makes perfect sense. And I use the analogy a lot of times. If you and I are walking down a hill and we start to lose our balance, generally we kind of rush to catch ourselves, right? But we never do catch ourselves. We just end up at the bottom of the hill faster, right? We need to slow down into balance. We need to slow down and use our joints in a way that allows them to carry our weight, to carry our mass in that balanced state.
I love that. I love that quote that you just pulled up about that, you can't send bad balance more forward. I have another similar one that I refer to all the time, which is if you add power to tension, you just get more tension.
Totally.
And it's the same kind of deal, where we're trying to actually, I think maybe from a human perspective, we're trying to sort of like break through to the next level by push, when actually it has to come in a completely different paradigm.
Absolutely.
Sorry to interrupt you, it just popped into my head.
No, that's perfect. And what I'll do a lot of times is play around with students, and I'll have them walk across the arena on foot, and we compare the difference between them just walking across the arena on foot and then standing on one leg and reaching the other leg forward and touching it to the ground and then shifting their weight into that leg and standing, really working through the core and working in an extremely aware balance in those moments. And it uses the body in completely different ways. And when we think about being on the horse, just the act of being on our horse puts him heavier on the forehand than his natural balance. And this is why things like self-carriage sounds easy. Let the horse carry himself, right? But it's not that easy because the horse carries 2/3 of the weight of the tack and the rider on the front end. So he's ultimately automatically on the forehand just because we're sitting up there.
Yeah, and if you've ever carried a small child in a backpack on your back, even though it seems like they're only a few kilos, it's amazing how it can just completely throw you off your game. So I'm completely empathetic to that as well.
Yes, absolutely.
So that process then of creating relaxation in that way where we're actually looking to mobilize the tongue or the jaw, which is something that I know your work refers to a lot, or it's certainly been my experience when I'm a member of your in-hand course.
Perfect.
And that's been something that really blew my tiny brain when I started looking at that. I was like, wow, look at those connections that the tongue has just in and of itself to the various parts of the body. I mean, I think that you described that the base of the tongue, and correct the details of this, actually joins directly to 20 other insertion points in the body that directly affect
Yes.
relaxation and connection
Yes.
and the ability to do all the things that we want them to do.
Absolutely, absolutely. If we look specifically at the tongue connects directly to over 20 individual muscles in the horse's body. The tongue connects directly to the muscle we sit on in our horse's back, and ultimately every muscle in the horse's body comes back and connects to the tongue. The idea of the mobilization of the jaw and the relaxation of the tongue, and I talk a lot about the hyoid apparatus, that series of bones in the horse's tongue. It has a huge influence there. If that tongue is tense, if we think about it, and this is where I should have had my skull handy here for this, but if we think about the connection of the tongue to the horse's TMJ, there's a direct link between the tension or relaxation in both of those places. And the TMJ carries a tremendous amount of proprioceptors, the nerves that talk to the brain about balance. And if you've ever had an inner ear infection that has messed with your balance, you know what happens when there's pressure and compression around your balance receptors. It throws off your sense of balance through your whole body. And the same is true for our horse. If there's tension in the TMJ, his sense of balance and awareness of his body is going to be not as clear as what it could be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then leading on from that, what really strikes me is just how important it is from the early stages of a horse's development. And obviously this is not something that we're always in a position to be able to influence, because some of us have horses later in their life where they've already had certain experiences coming into it.
Yes.
But their experience with the bit, what bit they've been, ridden with, and how that's been introduced, and how their associations, I guess, that early piece has such a dramatic effect on everything else that comes from that point, that we really can't underestimate, how it is we need to work with that in training. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, absolutely. And a large part of what we end up working with in clinics is changing the horses. I refer to it as their personal philosophy as it relates to contact, or as it relates to the bridle, because that is such a huge piece, and we could argue that any bit can be harsh if used harshly, and of course that's true. But what I think ends up happening, and I get to talking about all of the rider's aids in this sense, but the bit specifically, one of the primary function of the bit and all of the aids, the primary function is to bring relaxation and release tension. The secondary function of our aids would be to direct, educate, or shape.
Yeah.
And so we get oftentimes these horses that have been educated in a different way, that the relaxation has not been part of that, the true relaxation. We talk about acceptance of the bit, we could talk about that all day long, but what does that look like? And it can be tricky sometimes. We can see that horse that's maybe quietly mouthing the bit. Mark Russell used to refer to it as savoring the bit, and I think that's a great way to picture that in your mind. But it's a very fine line between savoring the bit and anxiously working the tongue and chewing on the bit also, and then we get these horses that can be quiet in the mouth, either because of tension and they've learned to be stable or still as a self-protective thing. And then we can also have a horse that's quiet in the mouth because he is accepting. And so there's definitely a different feel through the rest of the body when we have that taking place. There's going to be a feel kind of in the tongue. You'd feel it in your hands, once you've experienced it, you'd feel the difference in it, but it can be a little bit tricky sometimes. And this is where also we run into troubles with, we talk about horses that are showing signs of tension in the bridle or against the bit, or however you want to call it. So now we just strap their mouth shut by tightening the nose band, and if that doesn't do it, well, thank goodness they sell all these bridles with those crappy flashes now that we can crank it shut and hide the fact that our horse is going around actually anxious and uneducated.
Yeah. So I mean, these conversations, I'm going to put it entirely selfishly motivated. Patrick, I have questions that I want to ask off the back of this.
Perfect.
But I think that in terms of it being relevant to everyone out there, when we think about bits then and that function, like you say, actually the primary function of an aid or any device that we're using is first to really encourage that relaxation and move that forward to suppleness and strength and balance and all of those lovely things that come about. And then the secondary function of our aids being to sort of direct in the way that perhaps we want to move that energy. When we have horses from varying stages of life and varying backgrounds of understanding and experience, when we talk about the importance of the bit and how we want to create relaxation in terms of their association and being able to establish that level of subtlety between us as a rider with the bit. Am I making sense so far? On the one hand, we will have horses which have a negative association with the bit from previous experience. So a trauma reaction, if you like, where there's that chomping or anxiety or apprehension about what it is that it means to have that in their mouth and what's coming. And then perhaps we have young horses or horses which haven't been ridden much with a bit, like maybe they're just getting into the stage of riding with a snaffle or they've been primarily bitless. Is the process coming into that similar? Like, do you treat that reintegration process or reassociation process with the bit in a similar way to introducing the bit to a horse that perhaps doesn't have an association yet? Or is there, I know that you can't kind of break it down this specifically, or is there something else that I'm missing here?
No, I think you're on the right track with thinking about that. And I make the joke all the time that I am the laziest freaking princess anybody has ever met. When it comes to riding and working with the horse. And when we're talking about this association, there might be certain things that we might have to do a little bit differently and how we approach things slightly differently depending on the intensity of the anxiety and that sort of thing. But for the most part, we can talk about getting the horse to relax all we want, but that's like what you work with when you're working with riders. That's like making someone else relax. You can't do that, right? You can introduce things to them that encourages that to happen, but you can't be the one to bring it about, right? It's like I can explain something to you, but I can't understand it for you, right? You have to allow the horse the time to work through that on their own, and sometimes it's for very brief moments, and then you might get out of there. You might take the bit off completely. Other times, it's about hanging in there longer until they can find that release and that relaxation coming through. But the biggest piece is that the horse is the active participant in releasing their own tension. And that's about how we present it to the horse. So I would say most of the time, I don't want to say all the time, although I'm tempted, I would present it the same way, regardless of whether the horse had ever carried the bit in the first place, or if the horse has had 20 years of riding and he's just learned to be tense. It's about that soft mobilization of the jaw. It's about, a little vibration to activate the tongue. It's about just waiting until we get that lateral release. We talk about a lateral release of the occipital pole, that atlanto-occipital joint, the first connection between the skull and the atlas, or the first vertebrae in the horse's neck. That's a huge piece right there. My friend Mark would talk about that as being the doorway to the rest of the spine. Because if there's tension in the pole there's going to be tension through the rest of the body. Now, of course, when we're talking about the pole, we're not talking about that bony knob on top of the horse's skull. That's technically the pole. But you hear people talk all the time about pole flexion, and that's what we're talking about, is that occipital pole. It's just about bringing the relaxation there. And the big thing that we need to do in that case is wait. Right? We might pick up the rein, say it's a young horse, a green horse, it's the first time with the bit in their mouth. I might pick up on that bit and just wait right there until that horse softens mildly into it. And it's a soft little subtle flexion or release into the hand. It's not about pulling his nose over one way. I think about it as though I'm just going to pick up the bit and move it here, and I'm going to wait for the horse to come underneath that. And they find their own release within the movement that they offer. I'm always thinking I control, my horse controls the pressure, but I control the parameters, right? If I can move that bit over there and have them find their spot underneath that or within that contact, that's where our lightness is going to come from. That's where our understanding is going to come from. That gets challenging when a horse has had negative associations. That gets challenging when a horse has learned to be protective in the contact or in spite of the contact, where they might just hang there forever or seemingly forever on the bit. And so then I might go in and tickle their tongue a little bit to get the jaw to mobilize and then help them to find that spot. But again, for the most part, we're just waiting for that horse to find the answer for himself.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. This actually, I have a question from Tanya Spencer in New Zealand, and she asked what your thoughts were on Boucher and his second manner. And also the reason that I thought this was a good time to bring this question up was because the second part of that is she was asking how much of a change you've seen on your travels with jaw flexion.
Yes. So we hear a lot about Boucher in dressage when we're talking about jaw flexions, and as Tanya asked, Boucher in the second manner. There was, we'd say, a couple stages of Boucher and his development and his training process and that sort of thing.
And they formally divided that up into a first and second manner, haven't they, in terms of the way it's presented?
Yes, absolutely. And it's very yin and yang. It's one way was rather rough and kind of just pull their head around and really kind of get at them to get them supple. It's kind of what we see in some circles nowadays.
Boucher must have had his moment in the stables with the horse grazing his ears.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. And in the second manner that everyone refers to, there was more of an academic approach to that as far as the horse's balance goes, and it's much like what I teach, what I've learned from my teachers, and what we see in a lot of really great horsemanship, not just dressage, but horsemanship, where we're talking about elevating the base of the neck. So, and I refer to it as an elevated release, right? That upward lifting of the base of the neck and softening, swanning forward. Slight lateral flexion or lateral releases to one side or another, and then up to, a horse can bend the neck up to 90 degrees before they fall into that inside shoulder and lose their balance. So there's different flexions in that way, different positions. And it's super helpful to educate the horse, again, about controlling the pressure, right? Understanding where the parameters are to the rein aids, rather than having that horse just dive down onto the forehand because we're pulling on the bridle, basically, or pulling on the reins. And the second part of Tanya's question there about, can you re-ask that second part?
How much of a change are you seeing on your travels with jaw flexion?
How much of a change am I seeing? So I would say that through the years, I've been seeing a lot more of it. But I think, as we kind of talked about, I feel like this is a little bit of a selection problem for me. It's because I'm traveling within circles and kind of becoming known as someone who teaches a lot of this work, that I'm seeing more of it. Because, kind of like that whole law of attraction idea, right?
You're getting presented with a lot more of it.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if I'm chasing it or if it's chasing me, but it does come up a lot more. And if I think about kind of maybe circles I used to travel in, I may have never noticed it there. It may have never been a thing there, but I wasn't aware of it anyway. So even if it was
yellow
there...
car theory.
Yeah, the yellow car theory, absolutely. You don't see any yellow cars until you buy one, and suddenly you see them everywhere, Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Fascinating. Okay, I mean, we could go for days. So I know these are hugely general topics that I'm bringing up for the sake of discussion, but we've been talking a lot about creating relaxation and this necessity for that to start, at the front and work towards the back, not only because of the, mainly because of the anatomical considerations there as well. So in order to actually create a situation where we're able to move into collection and engagement, and these what are quite gymnastic positions for the horse when they're required to do so with us influencing them in different ways. How does the in-hand work then inform and allow us to create that platform for being able to establish that communication and create that conversation before we even get on their backs?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a way that I described it recently, and I think I'm going to stick with this description for a while until I come up with a better one, and then I'll change. But
we can redo at any point.
Totally.
Yeah.
We can always hit the reset button, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And that's what I love about this journey too, is that, I would like to think that my answers get better as my education and awareness improves,
You would hope.
Right.
You actually, I hope that in 5 to 10 years' time, the stuff that I've done is obsolete.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, and actually looking back on even a couple of years, I have cringeworthy moments when someone reads something and I think, oh, no, don't read that. Read this instead.
Right, exactly. Yeah, but I think that's a great thing.
Yeah. Evolution.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So when we're talking about helping the horse to find that balance in hand and that carrying over into the saddle, one of the ways that I've come to start to describe that now is, you're giving the horse a place of awareness within their own body that's easier for them to find without us on top of them. And then once we get on top, they have that as a point of reference. They know how to engage those muscles, even if it's a little more challenging because we're on their back, right? Think about maybe we're going to go to the gym and we're going to do some squats. Chances are we're going to learn about the form of doing a squat before we add 300 pounds to a bar and put that over top of our shoulders, right?
Yeah,
I
would really hope so.
Right, exactly. Otherwise, it could end really poorly. And it's the same idea with our horses. If we can help them find, particularly our horses that have tension when it comes to lateral work or challenges being very heavy on the forehand, which a lot of our horses are naturally heavier on the forehand than what we'd want them to be a riding horse. We can educate them about that balance and those muscles that need to begin to work before we ever climb on. And then it's easier for them because, like I said, then they have that point of reference, which I think is so important to us.
Mm-hmm. And it's not only the mental organisation that you're referring to, it's a literal physical organisation as well. If their conformation or anatomy perhaps doesn't allow for, that's not the right way to describe it, but, it hasn't been programmed or set that way previously, then it literally is like trying to connect up left and right again.
Yes, absolutely.
What I've noticed doing your in-hand course is that slowing everything down to the extent that you need to be able to set those new patterns in place, it becomes much easier to identify where the tension exists or where the immobility or the bracing happens, especially because I have a big long horse.
Okay.
All of a sudden you see it's like literally seeing things pop out in different areas, like the shoulder might go, or all of a sudden we have way too much flexion. And those details get so easily overlooked when you're actually moving through things fast.
Yes.
So that's been a huge lesson as well, to be able to do it in that way.
Yes, and speed is definitely a horse's natural response to tension. They're a flight animal, right?
Yeah.
Where the horse feels tense or tight, they'll generally want to rush, or they'll generally want to move kind of that more forward idea. Excuse me, which again makes it challenging with this idea of more forward, right? In that the tension is never addressed in that sense. So then, because we're not addressing it, we can't eradicate it. I think of it all the time like it's a seek and destroy mission. I want to find all the places where there's tension, and I want to get rid of that, And another thing to think about, if we think about it from, say, a physical therapy perspective, When you go in for whatever injury, rehabilitation, whatever, you go into physical therapy, there's just as much about the mental connection and the rewiring past mobility patterns as there is the strength building, right? So if you go in and you get a set of exercises and you just breeze through them really fast, you're not helping that mental connection, you know? So when we really slow down to break through the tense spots or the bracy spots that we might talk about, and I don't want to talk too much about this because it's getting a little bit out of my lane, but we're actually affecting the neurology at that point, and we're rewiring the horse's brain for better movement in the body. You know, we think about, I have a friend who's training to be an equine osteopath, and a way that he said it was really interesting. You know, we talk about chiropractic and moving bones, right? Well, bones only go where the muscles tell them to go, right? And the muscles only go where the brain tells them to go, right? So if we can come in there on more of a deeper level, and again, allowing the horse to release the tension for themselves, we can have a much greater impact, you know? And then when we think about things like building strength, that's really important too. If you go to the gym and you do, let's say you're doing a bicep curl, and you pick up a weight and you're just swinging it and flying around with it, well, all you're going to really be doing is wearing out your joints. You're not going to actually be building muscle. The slower you move that weight, the more focused you get on the muscles that actually need to develop. So you're going to build strength faster, with even, you know, really less recovery time because you're not wearing the joints out when you do it that way.
Yeah. It's so much like yoga for horses. Like when when I was studying yoga therapy, like the actual nuances of yoga where you're using your own body weight to build muscle strength and to reorganize patterns which aren't serving you. Like I went from a very dynamic practice, which was essentially just like a gym-based yoga practice, not really yoga at all, to a proper therapeutic understanding. And you see how actually the very subtle and the very simple have these hugely profound effects on changing the whole movement pattern and function of the body, provided that your primary focus at all time is optimizing the spine. So as long as you're staying within the range of optimizing the spine, then everything else, you know, people's natural limitations, you optimize the function within the sphere that's possible for that person. So it might not be that they're going to be the most flexible or the most, you know, the most strong even, but within what's possible for the individual, then you're really looking to create a practice to optimize them. And I feel like with the in-hand work and dressage at its core as well is really about gymnasticizing the horse to optimize the function that's possible for that horse. Which is why it's not really possible to not be good at it because it's not a competition.
Right,
it's a way of going about things, Yes.
I love that connection that you made there. That's so true. So perfect.
Yeah, it's the other thing from I get excited, so my brain's like going ahead of my tongue now. But the other thing that I found really interesting from a human perspective is that idea that we're all addicted to at times. And I think this comes from like the push mentality. Like we're all told to push harder and go faster and go longer and like break through the pain barrier, if you like, to get to the other side. And when it comes to being presented with a horse that perhaps is in a higher energy place, you know, perhaps they're anxious or upset or just sort of operating on that sort of higher tensile that you see in some horses, that our natural thought pattern, before we really understand the underlying behavioral concerns attached to that, is actually to make them move faster, you know, to get rid of the adrenaline and sort of move that through. And actually, when you break it down, sometimes it feels really counterintuitive. But when I've worked with my horses in the ways that you've described, which feels like super slow and methodical and very specific about where it is I want you to put this foot and how it is you're going to move, the releases are enormous. Like all of a sudden I have the yawns and the eye rolling and it seems from a very small but specific exercise that I've asked them to do.
Yes, absolutely. The focus that comes into that, and, you know, and I keep going back to the horse is the active participant in the releasing, you know. The focus that we get with that slowing it down is just tremendous. And like you said, the releases from little tiny movements, little tiny pieces of bringing awareness to their body. You know, I say all the time that the horse can be their own masseuse. All we have to do is show them where the tight muscle is, you know, and let them work it out. It's such a, and of course I'm generalizing with that, but yeah, the tiny movements, you know, so important. And if we think about it from a biological perspective, when we rush a prey animal, we put them in the sympathetic dominant state of their nervous system. We put them simply on that fight or flight. They go into self-preservation mode. And learning does not happen from that place in the nervous system. It's just not possible.
The telescoping as well, like when we're looking to extend the top line as that start point for the in-hand work. So just to briefly potentially bastardize something that you would explain beautifully, with the start of the exercise where you're asking the horse to, you know, like extend the neck in a way that's actually adding that beautiful stretch as opposed to forcing into the... You can get a similar look without it being the same through actually like forcing it rather than allowing for it.
Yes.
And something that I learned in yoga that struck me when I was out there waiting for that moment to come rather than being able to sort of like make it come, if that makes sense. Was this other misconception that we have that, you know, pulling creates stretch. Whereas what happens is that pulling creates contraction, because as soon as if you were to pull my arm rapidly, what would happen was the muscles contract around the joint to protect it, as you already know. Absolutely. This is just for the sake of explanation. But that, you know, if we were to gently sort of mobilize that, then everything relaxes. So it's the support that creates the relaxation rather than the actual mechanical action. Yes. And that really got me thinking when we were doing that exercise. A total tangent.
No, it's perfect. It's perfect. And that's so true, you know, and often I'll tell students, you know, follow where the horse wants to go until he releases to where you want him to go, you know, because exactly what you said, you know, you start pulling on that, you're going to create that contraction, and there's very much a difference between, so say we're talking about the stretching and the lengthening of the top line, there's very much a difference between a horse putting his head down and a horse actively reaching forward through the spine. You know, that's two very different things. And often if we just teach the horse head down, we'll cause him to be kind of stuck in that spine, to be stuck in his body, versus helping him to find that releasing stretch.
I heard you use a really good example for that, which clicked in my mind, which was, it's different. You know, there's a difference between just reaching down to tie your shoelace up and actually stretching and touching your toes. Like that's a completely the same kind of action. Like if you looked at the snapshot of the end result, it could look very similar, but two very different ways of going about things and processes that create that.
Absolutely. Yeah, talking about, you know, going back to the yoga, right? There's definitely a difference between bending down to tie your shoes or to pluck a weed out of the sidewalk or something and doing that forward fold, right? It's a very, very different movement that can look similar, if we're not really paying close attention.
Yeah, one you can force and one you can't.
Absolutely. And one is going to do your body good and one is going to do your body harm potentially.
Yeah. And in terms of the riding, it's all about the feel at that stage, isn't it? Yes. Like you feel there's something very, very unique and addictive about that feeling of reach when it's coming from a place that's engaged and connected. It's really lovely.
Absolutely. It is addictive. That's a great way to put it. It is addictive. Once you feel that, you just don't want to settle for anything else.
No, look at us all, a bunch of addicts over here, like just waiting for the next hit.
Right? And control freaks, no less. Jeez, oh man.
So much. I'll just talk for myself. I don't want to like scoop everyone into my CD pool.
Oh no, no. I think if we're involved with horses in any way, we are not just, you know, people talk about the type A personality. No. We're type A squared, right? We don't just want to control things. We want to control the entire existence of another living being.
I know. I have a few non-horsey friends, and it's kind of crazy to talk about, but I have a few non-horsey friends, and occasionally I met someone recently in my sort of a business group, I think, and she said, I met this horsey woman, but she was kind of obsessive. Is that normal? And I was like, really? Well, no, that's not normal. So I'm just going to go and get a cup of tea, okay? Yeah. Because I don't have anything else to talk about.
Right, exactly. Yeah, conversation over.
So funny. Oh my
so
goodness.
True.
I'm just looking at my notes because I made like copious notes before we got into this. Is there anything that you want to drop in that is sort of front of mind or that you'd like to share with everyone while we're...
Oh, goodness. See, the being put on the spot part here. Gosh, no. I guess I would just go back to when we talk about the slower idea. I talk often about the 4 keys to doing any of this stuff. And the first piece, actually, before we talk about the 4 keys, is understanding that we have permission to suck at this stuff, right? We have permission to do it wrong. And we're not going to mess our horse up. That's something that, I find students worrying about that all the time. And I say all the time also that, you can't mess up something with a brain. You can confuse it. You can frustrate it, but you can't mess it up. If you want to see something messed up, give me anything mechanical or electronic, right? I'll show you what it is to mess something up. Because for me, if it doesn't wear hair, fur, fins, or feathers, I don't understand it. There's reasons why I don't work for NASA, and they're obvious if you spend even 5 minutes around me.
Yet.
Yet.
You don't want to...
Yeah, absolutely. But so that's a piece that I want people to really understand, is that when we're doing any of this stuff, we have unlimited permission to get it wrong, to do it wrong, to completely flub and fail and look like a dummy,
Isn't it interesting that usually the people that are actually concerned about that are the ones that probably have least reason to be concerned about that, because they're actually aware of what it is that they're doing. And probably the biggest harm they're going to cause is actually not doing anything, because that thought immobilizes them from taking any sort of action.
Absolutely. 100%. 100%.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I see that thought thread a lot also.
I'm sure. Yes. It seems to be pretty common. Yeah.
Yeah. Well-intentioned, but sometimes quite destructive in terms of movement forward.
Yes, exactly. But so after that, I talk often about the 4 keys to all of these pieces, and those are rather deceptively simple keys, and that's slower, softer, wait, and breathe. Right? I feel that those are really the most important pieces. Slower, softer, wait, and breathe. That's something that, when we talk about the breath, we need to notice, are your horses breathing? Are you breathing? But even more, are your horses breathing when we're doing any of this work together? It's something that we focus on with ourselves so often. We're doing yoga, focus on the breath. You're playing golf, right? Learning how to golf, you focus on the breath. You're shooting archery, focus on the breath. You're taking riding lessons, focus on the breath. When you're working with your horse in hand, make sure he's breathing also. Right? Focus on his breath, or her breath, as the case may be. But when we're riding, when we're working in hand, it's important to note: is our horse actually breathing, or are they coming from a place of holding their breath, which is going to limit their body also? Right? If they're not breathing, it's just like us. If we're not breathing from the diaphragm, movement is going to be restricted. If the horse is taking shallow breaths, or even holding their breath because of tension, distraction, anxiety, anything like that, it's going to have a negative effect on their movement, and thereby whether or not their body's actually capable of releasing into the postures and the movements we're asking for.
I love that. Yeah, that's awesome. So much can be solved by actually slowing down or potentially just waiting.
Just waiting, absolutely. Yeah. Wait and breathe. I had a student, she had several sessions with me at a clinic in Ohio this past weekend. And she made the joke that if anybody were to just walk in and look at that lesson, they'd think we weren't doing a darn thing. Because there were moments when we stood around and waited for nearly 10 minutes for her horse to actually take a breath before moving on,
Yeah. It's the amount of situations I've complicated by not waiting for long enough. I can
Me too. Absolutely.
So now I'm like, why don't we just wait? See what happens if we wait? We can always do what we were going to do afterwards, but we could just leave it for a little while.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Exactly. I have a friend who's a reining trainer, and every time he would get a really good stop out of one of his reining horses, a good sliding stop, he would sit there and smoke a cigarette. He was a heavy smoker. And it was, giving those horses that opportunity to wait. Now, I'm not saying that we should all go out and start smoking, but it was, he would stop and give them a break long enough for himself to have a cigarette, right? And at one point, he tried to quit smoking. And he jokes about it as being the worst time when his horses couldn't stop for a damn. Because he was just going on to the next thing, right? They weren't getting that time to stop and think and breathe and focus and relax and, you know, really soak on what they had done. So, yeah, he's like, yeah, I took smoking back up again, man. My horse training was suffering, he says.
I'll tell you something funny, completely unrelated, but occasionally I get business propositions come into my email, like we all do, like, we think you'd be a great partnership for this, it's like, let's hook up and do this. And I got one from a cigar company, and you just think about it, like, our cigars we think would be the perfect fit for your audience, and they listed 3 different reasons as to why smoking cigars would be beneficial for the horse riding community.
Funny.
And I until you mentioned that, Patrick, I'd completely ruled it out. But now you mentioned it, I can see how not just a cigarette, but a cigar would leave a significant wait time for horses.
Yes, absolutely. There you go.
So yeah, I missed a trick.
See?
You can't win them all.
Oh man, right? You got to call them back, see if they're still interested.
Exactly, yeah.
I love
so
it.
what's next on the cards for you then? You've just done, I know, your farrier qualification, like that was, I was like, where did you get the time to do that? I was so impressed. I was like, just squeezing that in there, just popping it in.
Just popping it in, just popping it in. Actually, I had to schedule that 1.5 years ago. With the way that my schedule works, my business manager, Dee Dee, she could tell you where I'm going to be next December. Actually, we know where I'm going to be next not this coming, so February of 2021, she could tell you where I'm going to be at this point.
Impressive.
So, yeah, frightening, I think, is more like it. But, it was about 1.5 years ago that I had to schedule for the farrier course. And again, that's something that, you know, I've wanted to do that since I was 16. Not to ever be a farrier, but just because I'm obsessive about learning more and knowing everything in my quest to eventually take over the world.
Domination.
Right,
basically.
World domination.
Yeah, hashtag world domination.
Yes.
Patrick Horsemanship.
I love it. Yep, that'll be the new hashtag. But and I was really fortunate. Somehow I ended up with an excessive amount of energy, and I drove through the night instead of breaking up my drive from Virginia to Oklahoma in 2 or 3 days. So I got to Oklahoma early, and a friend of mine, Mike Corcoran, is a saddle maker, Western and Dressage saddles, makes jumping saddles as well. And I was going to pop down and visit him for a day and just visit. And I ended up with, it was 2.5 days that I ended up free. So I popped down and visited with him and took a saddle fitting course. While I was down there too. So I got to, that was just a super awesome bonus that I got to add on to that. But so lucky again, you know, in those moments. But at this point, we're coordinating the next leg on the big adventures. We've got a trip to Portugal coming up again. We've been doing those for a couple years now. So we've got.
I'm wildly jealous about that. I've locked that in for the future.
You should totally.
Every time it comes up, I have like a physical reaction. I'm like, I really would want to do it.
Yeah. It's that's going to be super awesome, and then we're also going to be heading over to Spain for a couple weeks as well after we go through Portugal. Then I'll be coming back just in time to pop over to New Zealand, actually. So.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, just flying you back to Portugal for a second. You spend a chunk of the year there.
Yes.
Training, don't you?
Yes, absolutely. It's a great opportunity for me to go over and get lessons, up to several lessons a day while I'm there for a couple months. The biggest reason is, as I said before, I'm a princess, and I'm not a fan of the cold. So I get to go.
Which is why I chose to live near the Antarctic.
There you go, yeah. So it is great. I get to go over there and enjoy much nicer climate for a good part of the winter. But it is also my opportunity to get more lessons, you know.
Yeah.
And actually, the first year that we did that, you've seen my schedule. The first year that we went over there to Portugal was the longest I'd sat still in one place for about 20 years.
Wow.
It was kind of insane. But man, it was fantastic. You know, as I said, it's my opportunity to ride upper level horses, higher level horses, and work on me. You know, which is really important.
We
and then
all
I
get to benefit from it.
Yeah, exactly, right? I get to bring that back and you know, share that with as many horses as I touch, which I think I figured it out the other day. It's about 200 to 250 horses every month.
Wow.
So I feel like I'm super blessed that way to be able to get that much experience. You know, I can experiment with so many horses, you know.
Amazing. So for those of us out there who are like, where can I learn from Patrick, or how can I find out more about him? What's the best way to go about doing that?
Oh gosh. So my website, pkhorsemanship.com, has a Google Calendar on there that's constantly updated with where I'm going to be around the world. And
Till February 2021.
Exactly, right? Yes, exactly. Or at least as far out as that calendar will show it.
Yes, yeah.
And we do a lot through Facebook. That's a big piece for us. We try to do daily posts, not always just educational posts, but fun posts and, you know, really interacting, that sort of thing. But we're always posting where our clinics are going to be, where my clinics are going to be. I do a lot of lectures and things like that as well. And we've got, of course, as you know, the in-hand course that's online. That's going to be released again in the spring. We have timing for when that's released because the students each get video coaching along with that. And that's something that I do outside of that course also, is video coaching. So even if somebody that I'm maybe not going to be in their country or their area, I get a lot of videos through the month that I can coach, you know, as riders are going and progressing.
I'm going to be adding myself to that list, as I've already highlighted. Yeah, that's really cool. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for hanging out today. It was wonderful to be able to have this conversation. I'll link to all the bits and pieces that you described in the show notes as well once it goes up on the actual podcast. But It's been really fun to do this. Awesome.
Perfect. Thank you so much. This has been a blast. My first time being on the other side of the microphone for this.
I know. How was it? Are you okay? Or do you need to go and have more coffee or something?
Yeah, right? Oh, man. I've got to pull out the whiskey.
Yeah.
I haven't told you what's been in my mug all this time.
That's awesome. Oh, thank you again, Patrick. I'll talk with you really soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.